Good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Odahowski, President, CEO, and Trustee of the Edyth Bush Charitable Foundation, located in beautiful Winter Park, Florida, a vibrant community with good-paying jobs and internationally known for education, healthcare, and the arts. We're also a trustee of the Florida Chamber Foundation because we believe in the future of Florida, and to secure the future of Florida, we became a community development partner with an annual 5-figure investment in the work of the Florida Chamber. Mark Wilson and his team sold us on the necessary costs of putting together this plan for Florida, and so we were in with a 6-figure gift on top of our annual investment. This afternoon, we've assembled the state's best 3 experts, advocates, and evangelists for business volunteering and its importance to secure Florida future. We have Clay Ingram, Chief Executive Officer for Volunteer Florida. In the middle, Sabeen, Perwaiz, Executive Director of the Florida Nonprofit Alliance. And to my immediate right, Kay Rawlins, Founder, Vice President of Community Relations, and Foundation President of the Orlando Lions, our Major League Soccer franchise here in Orlando. We hope you will learn, be inspired, and commit to the Florida 2030 goal of doubling the percentage of Floridians who volunteer, moving us up from 50th, and Sabeen may have throw a little darkness on that, out of 50 states and into the top quartile by 2030 or sooner. Let me ask by a show of hands now, how many of you have taken the time to volunteer within the last 12 months? Wow. Man, you are doing the heavy lifting. Almost every hand went up. While on average, only 22.8% of Floridians volunteer, and that's got to change. The challenges, the opportunities that business, government, and our nonprofits, it's going to take everything we can muster. And your commitment is vital to securing Florida's future. So Clay, as Chief Executive Officer of Volunteer Florida, responsible for marshaling up all of our resources statewide and accessing national resources. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about Volunteer Florida.
Thank you so much, David, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you. Having attended this event in the past, as an audience member, to be here and to have this chance to interact is an absolute honor for me and our organization, and to be here with these distinguished panelists as well. So my name is Clay Ingram, CEO of Volunteer Florida. Been on the job about 8 months. Came from the legislature. I termed out in November and then was appointed to the agency in January of this year. And it's been, a joy and pleasure to be involved in something that is universally seen as a very good thing, and proud to be involved in it. So our agency was created, and this is the 25th anniversary of the creation of AmeriCorps, which is our flagship program, and sort of the reason that Volunteer Florida, or past our previous name, the Commission on Community Service, was founded. And so our purpose originally was to administer federal volunteer programs, AmeriCorps being the flagship program, Teach for America, the Volunteer Generation Fund. There are others that we're involved in, but that is the reason that we were founded, the reason that we exist. Post Hurricane Andrew, we evolved into doing some other things, namely being in the chief or lead agency for the collection of volunteers and monetary donations in times of disaster. So we staff the ESF 15 desk at the state EOC, and that obviously is not just something that you do when times are bad or there is a disaster. It takes a lot of preparation to prepare for and to be able to handle that role. We're also involved in the general promotion of volunteerism in the state, and I think this will kind of segue into what Sabeen and Kay will talk about. But under that umbrella, I want to, if I have an ask or if I have a pitch or want to leave you with something, it's going to be this. We have a new platform in our sort of silo of general volunteerism called Volunteer Connect, and it's as simple as taking opportunities for volunteerism or agencies or 501c3s or governmental entities that have opportunities to or need volunteers, taking those opportunities and then matching them with people that can go onto the platform, individuals that want to volunteer. And you can say, I'm a 41-year-old man in Tallahassee. I would like to cuddle puppies in the evenings after work at the shelter. And it'll give you the opportunities to do that. And then obviously many, many meaningful opportunities are available. And then also I think it gives us the opportunity to take whatever your talent is and to be able to apply it to the need at a not-for-profit or a governmental entity that's in need of volunteers. And I think to help you understand that, DEP, for instance, has a lot of programs that are environmentally related, environmental restoration projects and things of that nature. And then obviously every 501c3 in the state is in need of volunteers. So that if I could leave you with this, when you get home, every one of you, I'm certain from the show of hands, are involved, whether you're a board member on a not-for-profit or you volunteer at a not-for-profit at home. Please ask them to go and to register on Volunteer Connect, volunteerconnect.org. Easy to remember, and it'll help the state improve that vital number that we're trying to move up from 51st out of 50 states and territories, well up into the top quartile. So we're excited about that, moving the ball for the 2030 initiative, and we think that is a way to do it, along with some education and some things that I know Sabeen's going to discuss later. So I'll hold back some if you're going to have questions, okay, David, but that's
great.
Generally it. Thank you for having me. So glad to be here today.
Sabeen, you're the Chief Executive Officer for Florida Nonprofit Alliance. So tell us about the Alliance. Tell us why volunteerism is important to Florida businesses and to Florida nonprofits.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. So the Florida Nonprofit Alliance's mission is to inform, promote, and strengthen the nonprofit sector here in Florida to build stronger communities. We're a fairly young organization. We started back in 2012, and the need arose where we looked at the landscape here in Florida, and there was no one entity really speaking out and looking out for the sector. When we look at the national data, so the National Council of Nonprofits, there are 44 state associations, so we're a proud member of that national entity. As far as the state's concerned and how the sector fares, we're about 7th as far as employment is concerned for the state, so comparable to construction or the financial services, and we employ roughly 530,000 individuals. And that's something that we like to reiterate because we're often seen as a sector that's taking and not necessarily giving, and so we want to highlight that we're also a business in that sense from how we employ individuals. Volunteerism is the backbone of nonprofits. As we all know, many of you raised your hands. A lot of nonprofits, in fact, majority of nonprofits have budgets of under $1 million. So they rely heavily on nonprofit volunteers, whether it be a nonprofit agency that's run solely by volunteers or nonprofits that are carrying out, the volunteers are carrying out the work of that nonprofit. We know that for Florida, people are volunteering their hours, but fewer and fewer people are doing so, and those fewer people, many of you in this room, are doing more of those hours. And as Bob would say, Bob McFalls from Florida Philanthropic Network, less and less people are giving. So in fact, giving has increased as far as the dollar amount is concerned, but giving by the number of individuals, that number has decreased. And so as a sector, we're nervous, and as Clay alluded, so we're actually 51st if we include the District of Columbia, and that is something that has not shifted in over a decade. And so those 900 people that are moving into Florida that we love to celebrate here at the Florida Chamber, how are we engaging those 810 that are moving into the state to become active participants of Florida, not necessarily passive residents in Florida?
You're very calm. Having a annual statewide meeting on Friday, and I hope you'll tell us a little bit more about that later. Kay, I'm going to drop kick it to you so you can use your header to tell us about the Orlando Lions' commitment to corporate social responsibility.
Thank you. Obviously, I'm not from Florida, not even from America originally. I'm from England, a town right in the middle of England called Stoke-on-Trent. Moved to America in 2004, was first in Texas, in Austin, which is where I first had my foray into the nonprofit world. I was waiting on a green card, and you can't work. So I started volunteering in a number of different nonprofits in Austin, and that was when I first saw the need that was out there. We started the team in Austin, so I'm one of the founders of Orlando City. And we started the team in Austin, and they didn't love us like Orlando does. So, so we left. There's a lot of reasons for that, and this is not the forum to go into that. But we arrived here in 2011, and we made community one of the pillars of our organization. And we stand true to that to this day. We actually now have our own foundation, but we do a lot of encouraging of community work. In fact, this last weekend, and anybody who's been to one of our games will know, we have the craziest fans. We have a standing section in our stadium, the whole of the section behind the goal. We were, I think, one of the first stadiums to do that. They wanted cup holders because they want to put their expensive beer and not spill it. But they jump and sing and make a lot of noise. They have flags. However, whenever we need volunteers, they are the first to put their hands up. And they actually had a little event of their own. They raised $5,000. And they've just this last weekend had 50 people out building a garden at Jones High School. And so it's, thanks. Thank you to them. So it's something that's very dear to us. And I feel very privileged that we have a platform where we can put that call out to, through social media, through our websites, through newsletters. We can gather a vast variety of people who are united under the color purple. If you didn't know that was our color, you do now. But it's been a great experience for me being able to call on people from all walks of life who do want to get involved and just don't know where to start. And I'm sure that's something, that we want to kind of go into here, is how do we match people up with all of those opportunities that are out there.
Great. Well, being that you weren't a Florida native and your ownership, they weren't Florida natives either, what kind of business case did you have to make for setting up a community relations volunteer effort, and did you get any pushback from them?
Sure, and I should add, I am now a very proud American citizen. I got my citizenship.
Well, that deserves a round of applause.
And our majority owners are Brazilian. So there definitely are some cultural pieces that we have to discuss. But I think because we'd already established very early on in the club itself that community was first and foremost something that we did, we haven't really had any problems. And it's something we expect of our players. And again, in the early days when we were a minor league team, you can write anything you want into those contracts, let me tell you. And any lawyers here, don't listen, but we wrote into everyone's contract that they had to do 20 hours of community service every season. Wow. And so that just then becomes ingrained in the culture. And so even when we changed and we became Major League, it really wasn't a big shift because we just continued expecting it of the players and our staff.
Right. So maybe Clay or Sabeen, what is the business case for volunteerism? Because we've got to be successful at what we're doing, and having a volunteer program's got to have some benefits. So what are the benefits to a volunteer program to business? What's the business case?
I think the biggest thing is your employees are happier, the quality of life increases, their retention within your organization increases because they see that you are a company that cares about their local community. And so we know that individuals that volunteer are happier people. They have purpose. They're not devoid of what to do within their community. And one of the reasons that I like to think about for businesses, you can also look beyond the check. So every volunteer or donor doesn't have to be Bill and Melinda Gates. And, people can start at any given level. And for nonprofits, that match between a business employee and a nonprofit for skill-based volunteerism is critical because nonprofits receive grants for program dollars. So they don't have the capacity or the bandwidth or the financial resources to look at communications or marketing, strategic planning, and benchmarking, evaluation. These are tools that business sectors has refined and mastered, and there are now programs and models across the country like Common Impact that partners with Fortune 500 companies to pair employees that in return for the business makes these employees better at the job that they're doing, is then also utilizing the hours that they are given to within their employee package to give back into the community. Kay mentioned 20 hours. That's amazing. For most organizations, that's roughly 8 hours that are allotted to volunteer. But when you look at the data of how many employees actually availed those 8 hours or claim that from their work, it's only 30%. So, a lot of you raise your hands, but how many of you are utilizing the hours that you get from your business, or how many of you in your business are encouraging and then checking on the staff to actually see that if they're utilizing those hours?
Very well said, and I'll add this. There's a measurable economic number as well of the approximately 3.8 million volunteer hours put in by Floridians last year. There's a kind of a common mathematical factor we use between $20 and $24 an hour. So you're talking about $8 billion economic impact when you measure those hours versus what it would have cost to have had to hire out people to do all of the tasks that are done by people that are putting in volunteer hours versus having to pay someone to do them, which could not be done because the often for, like Sabeen said, for a budget under $1 million, you don't have as a nonprofit the ability to hire people to do things, but with volunteer help you can.
Well, that's the average, $25 an hour. I've been learning about skills-based volunteering, where businesses will actually take very purposefully people from their finance department and put them in nonprofits. And they can do a day's worth of consulting and some ongoing consulting. They can even go on the boards of directors of nonprofit organizations, and so businesses then at a very effective cost can take their workforce and provide them with leadership and skill development, team building, employee loyalty and retention, employee recruitment, improved public relations, and ultimately it creates a stronger community. And the dollar figure for this skills-based volunteering is it's worth $175 to the organization and to the community. So, Kay, you are very much involved with the millennials and that younger workforce that we're all trying to attract. So, what do they want from their employment?
Well, and I think that's also something that's been pretty well documented, is that they're looking at companies to see what their corporate social responsibility policies are. And they also prove that they're incredibly loyal. So I know when we have businesses that get involved with us on the corporate side, everyone's always very interested to write themselves a community clause into what they're doing, because they want to be associated with companies that are out there in the community and that are doing what they say they do. We had certainly an uphill battle in the beginning when we were first here. We wanted to have a downtown stadium. Everybody wanted us to be over here, and it didn't make a lot of sense to have 25,000 soccer fans trying to get all into the same traffic as all the theme parks. So we stuck to our guns and wanted to be in Paramore. And I think for us that's been such an amazing experience. And the first part of that was listening. I cannot tell you how many community meetings I've been to in Paramore to sit and listen to the residents. What were their fears? What were their concerns? And I think that helped drive a lot of what we did. So when we started our philanthropy efforts, Paramore was very much in our heart, and that's where we started. What we do now, we're finally moving out into a few other areas now, because obviously our footprint as a club is huge. But we were very much based on our neighbors, our community, the people who we interact with on a daily basis. Even if it's as small as having a business lunch at one of the restaurants that's in Paramore, it's a way of showing your commitment to the community. But I know the youngsters that work for us jump at all the opportunities we give them to go and volunteer, whether it's reading with kids. I think trying to keep it local helps. I think if you make people have to travel to go and volunteer, or it's at the end of a long day rather than at the beginning. So I think one of the things we try and get inventive around is when we allow those opportunities to happen, and try and keep them in neighborhoods where our staff are involved, so that they're not traveling half an hour to get to a volunteer opportunity, be there for another 2 hours, and then have to travel again. So I think we just have to get creative around how we offer those opportunities.
Can I just jump in really quick, because Kay said something that reminded me. So when you think about what hinders people from volunteering, their commute is a big factor, and the national data source for this says that if a commute increases just 3 minutes, that's a 2.3% reduction in the percentage of volunteerism. And so when we look at the MSAs in Florida, Miami is last, and they have one of the worst commutes. So the data does also translate into where and how people choose to volunteer.
And so volunteerism is under the civic and governance pillar. So you can see that the infrastructure pillar for Florida 2030 is very important, because it impedes volunteers. And so Kay was mentioning Paramore. Paramore is a very economically challenged community. It's right downtown in Orlando. And you saw Harris Rosen on the video right before the panel presentation here. He has a replication of his Tangelo Park program. He's doing that in Paramore, and communities cannot succeed if parts of the community are failing. And so, Kay, did you think that your corporate social responsibility program, did that help you connect to the Orlando business community, to vendors, to your fan base?
Sure. And one of my dear friends is Linda Lemon Gonzalez from the Magic. And so we have lunch on a regular basis, and we kind of bounce ideas off each other. And one of the things we all know, we know everybody loves winning teams, but you know what? That's hard to maintain, and it's hard to keep going. And so if you want your supporters and people to stay, then you have to give them other reasons. And the Magic went through their some dark days, but they continue doing amazing things in the community. And so people still love them, still want to be involved with them. And we are just going through the same thing. We've had a few horrible years. And so we know that to sustain that support and for people to still look at you and want to get involved with you, you have to be doing other things. And that's when the community piece kind of rises to the top even more. And when you have to, focus people's attention on it sometimes to get away from the stuff. So yeah, it's been hugely important for us, and will continue to be through good times and bad. As long as I'm there, community will always be front and center of everything that we do.
Right. Clay, Volunteer Florida is very well known for its disaster response. What's your thinking about resiliency plans for communities? Because the resiliency plans contain various elements from all 6 of the pillars under Florida 2030.
Absolutely. need to shift from being reactive to proactive in the disaster management world is essential. We have one program to aim specifically at that we would like to continue to grow and expand and get word out about. The Community Emergency Response Team grant program, which does exactly what you described, David. It allows communities to formulate plans and people around the idea of being proactively prepared for disaster versus having everything be reactive. And so it's an annual program we administer through or in conjunction with the Division of Emergency Management. And so see me or visit our website if you have an interest. If your community doesn't already have that program in place or would like to do it, I'd love to talk to you about that. It's a wonderful program and helps us make that shift from being reactive to proactive.
Be a great way for businesses to get involved because no matter what natural disaster presents itself, we need to get people water, ice. We need people to get to medical care. We need people to get back to work as soon as possible and get back to normal. Now, that's a natural disaster and how volunteerism addresses that. Kay, you were here during Pulse, during one of our darkest days. Tell us about the Orlando Lions and the Orlando community and volunteerism and how it helped us out.
Sure. I mean, the first thing that happened was, and you and I, we both sit on the Donors Forum. So there's a forum here where a lot of the foundations, the private foundations, some of the company foundations, the theme park foundations, we all sit on a forum together. And it's been a great opportunity for us all to talk about things that are going on in our community and to be able to actually all come together to solve a problem rather than working in silos. And it's an opportunity to say, well, what are you funding? And somebody ask you this question. And so after Pulse, we were all on a call that night.
Sunday.
Yeah, the Sunday night.
We were all on a call, and we couldn't have done that if we hadn't already had those relationships.
Right, so the structure was already there. So we were on that call that night, and we were on a call every single day after that. And it was an update, it was who's pledged what, and then it was also the organization piece because, obviously it's so chaotic in the beginning. And so I think that was also an amazing, certainly to the outside world as well, was showing how a community does come together when something like that happens. I was in Scotland maybe 10 days after that. I was wearing my Orlando United shirt. And I don't know if you've seen them, it's the heart with all the different colors. It's an amazing shirt. We sold $500,000 worth of those shirts for the families of the Pulse victims. But we were wearing those shirts in Edinburgh, and people were coming up and hugging us and just saying, they'd seen what had happened, and they were just, obviously wanting to show their support. And I think, it took a long time afterwards to deal with some of the practical stuff, like how much water was donated and then where did it actually go. But I think the bigger picture was it showed us some gaps in our nonprofit areas because there were services needed after that we realized we didn't have. A lot of that was the mental health piece. It was having bilingual mental health counselors that we realized we didn't have. And so again, that was a coming together of the nonprofit world to help fund them in the interim so that all those services could happen, and now helping sustain them and make sure that they continue because some of those families are still struggling and still need that help. And I know as a club, we had a game that weekend or the following weekend, and it was an incredible outpouring of people being there at the game, but also again showing how our community can galvanize themselves. So our fans, and this was not at our urging, organized themselves into color groups. And so all around the stadium, this message had gone around saying, if you're in sections 120 to 122, we're red. If you're in 123 to 125, we're orange. And when you looked at our stadium, it was just this incredible, beautiful rainbow with rainbow flags and everything else. So we know our community can come together. We just have to figure out ways to galvanize them that does not involve an awful tragedy.
And while it was Orlando's darkest moment, it was also our brightest moment. We were under the gun internationally with media and all sorts of TV outlets. And while a human disaster in your community, we pray will never be that large, your community has expectations and needs to be prepared for these kinds of things, and volunteers can do that kind of work. Earlier I mentioned, Sabeen, that you look awfully calm for putting on a great statewide conference on Friday. Tell us about Nonprofit Counts, your first annual meeting, and some of your speakers, and they're bringing attention to the state of Florida.
Yeah, we are delighted to bring in Tim Delaney from the National Council of Nonprofits. So they just released their Nonprofit Impact Matters study, really benchmarking the sector nationally. And he'll be presenting on how we as a state compare to the national data. We also just finished our individual giving survey, so really looking at the habits of Floridians who do in fact give, and how do we readjust how the sector is doing our work, thanks to Wells Fargo, to ensure that we are doing what the sector needs to in order to reach our volunteers and our donors. And one of the data impact for this that came out of this survey was people didn't know how to connect with nonprofits. So to the earlier question of how do you get people to volunteer, well, the new Floridians who come in, they don't have that same sense of community. They don't know which nonprofits exist. So we have a data dashboard on our website that's free to use for anybody that chooses to access it, that allows you to see the impact of nonprofits within that county or that region, and we mimic the DEO's regions. Well, now we are going a step further. In February 2020, you will be able to click the county and then see there are 80 arts-based nonprofits here in Orange County. You can then click to see who those are and then go directly to their websites to learn more about them. And so we really want to make it as easy as possible for people to access the 75,000 plus nonprofits that are within the state of Florida and talk about the great work that they're doing, whether it's their board, whether it's their volunteers, but connecting people to where these agencies are, which seems to be the greatest barrier for Floridians.
Great. Now, sporting events. Everybody's a sports fan, and what would happen? Florida's has a bid in for the World Cup 2026. What's volunteerism got to do with it?
Well, I'm sure there are some people here who were around in the '94 World Cup when it was here in Orlando, and everyone I ever speak to about that tells me what an incredible experience it was. Everyone was able to get involved. It was loads of fun. There was all kinds of things that come along with it. And those huge, big events like that, the Olympics, any kind of we just had the All-Star game. They cannot continue. They can't go on without volunteers. We simply don't have the bandwidth to be able to do it ourselves. And something like the World Cup would be incredible, not just because of obviously the economic impact it has when teams come here and stay here and their fans come and they rent cars and they spend money and they eat in our restaurants. It's also the world attention piece as well. And I hope we get it. I'm sure there's people from Miami here also hoping they do as well. The ideal scenario would be we both get it, which would be awesome. I think Florida, we stand a really good chance. Our weather is great. We have the great transportation options. Everyone can fly certainly to Orlando anyway. Everyone does fly to Orlando. So, but yeah, I hope it comes. It'll be such an exciting thing to happen.
Great. We're just going to wrap it up here. Clay, some quick words and maybe social media little hashtag or
Sure. Absolutely. VolunteerConnect.org. Please ask your friends and everyone you know to register their 501c3 volunteer opportunities on Volunteer Connect. And then hashtag ServeFL is our sort of official hashtag. So ServeFL. Thank you, David.
Great. Sabeen?
I think for me right now it's Florida Counts, FL Counts, and that's primarily because the census is coming and a third of our state budget is directly related to census numbers, and that heavily, heavily impacts the nonprofit sector. So it would be a failure on my part if I did not mention that.
I'll obviously big up our own OrlandoCityFoundation.org, and our hashtag is always kicking it back, because that's what we do.
You're always kicking it back, Kay, and you do it with that accent. So when we succeed,
I can't help that.
I love listening to her. So when we succeed with Florida 2030, we'll live in a state where all the businesses are profitable and volunteering, all the governments are efficient and using volunteers, and all the nonprofits are above average in impact and volunteerism. Hashtag Florida Volunteers for Good. Thank you very much.